I don't know who needs to hear this, but you do not have to be in a religion to believe in God. What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of A Stronger You. Today, I'm going to get pretty vulnerable and I'm going to share my story. So recently I realized that I haven't really been as vulnerable as I want to be on my podcast. And so we are changing that right now by really starting to share my story more. And part of my story is how I got into spirituality. I didn't have a regular childhood. Yeah, I don't know. I almost blanked on that word. I didn't have a regular childhood growing up, as a lot of us didn't. I grew up, my mom was Jewish. My dad was, I still don't even know what he calls it, Christian, Catholic, or something. And so both of them were not religious. They got married. They raised me and my brother. They did not raise us religious at all. And so when I was younger, anytime someone would say the word God, I would get so uncomfortable because I had no idea what God was. And here on earth, God is such a big thing, obviously. And, there's some religions that talk about God as a person or God is this, God is that. And I had no idea what God meant. So anytime the name God was brought up, I would instantly be so uncomfortable. I remember in school when I was younger, kids would be like, "Oh, what are you?" I would say, "Oh, well, I'm like Jewish and Catholic." And they'd laugh at me and be like, "Ha ha ha, you can't be both." I was like, "Well, that's just what my parents are, so that's what they told me." And this is not my parents' fault at all. I'm just simply sharing with you how I got into my journey of spirituality, and it all, got to go through the whole backstory. So let's see, moving forward, as I got older, I realized that because I didn't have religion, I was kind of forced to just believe in myself, which is kind of a cool thing, if you ask me. But when I was younger, I hated it. I hated that I didn't have a religion. I always said when I'm older, I'm going to marry someone or I'm going to become religious this is me like not knowing what it is. By the way, I'm not religious at all. But this is what I thought all there was at that time. I thought that I was just going to be religious because I didn't want my future kids to grow up the way I did because I felt like I was always missing something. And so that's the other part. As I was younger, I always felt like I was just missing something. And I personally believe it was because I didn't have that religion when everyone else around me did. Fast forward, I would say I am out of high school in my college life, and I'm starting to get really curious. Okay. My aunt, who's the first member of my family, she passed away very unexpectedly. This is probably the first death in my family who's closest to me. And I got curious, as I'm a curious person. And I'm like, okay, what happens now? What happens after you pass away? And so interesting because when she passed away, I started seeing the number 444 everywhere. And I looked it up because I was like, yo, why do I keep seeing 444? 444 means your guardian angels are guiding and protecting you. And I was like, okay, that makes sense. So I chose to believe that. And for me to believe something like that was kind of a big deal when I was younger because I didn't really have anything to believe in. So for me to choose to believe in something felt very foreign to me, but it felt right in my stomach and in my heart. So I would say that was probably the first thing that brought me into spirituality. And then I was friends with this girl who was Christian, like the Christian religion. And I was like, it looks her church looked so cool, by the way. I don't think this church is around anymore, but it was called Hillsong. And I went to Hillsong Church with her. They're like all over the world. And I was like, okay, this is kind of cool. Like this is cool that there's other like-minded people who are just super positive and loving. But as I was in like the church services, I just, it like just didn't fully feel welcoming to me. It was so sweet of her too, because she got me a Bible and I've had like opened it here and there. And I love Bible quotes. I love Bible quotes. Some of those quotes be on fire, like so good. Um, and so she got me the Bible. And yeah, again, I just didn't really resonate with it. So I stopped going to that church. And I would say this is where it all got really interesting with like me and my belief system and how I really got confident with knowing what my beliefs were, because for the longest time I had no idea what my beliefs were. Right after COVID, like the pandemic, I moved out of my house and I moved to a new state by myself. And I would say like around that time, like a couple years, maybe even like a couple years before I moved out, I was really into self-development. I've been into self-development really my whole life, but I got deeper once I moved out of my house. And, self-development, personal development, and spirituality is kind of similar yet different. Okay. I know some of y'all might come at me for this, but just hear me out. Personal development and spirituality has very similar things in them. And so through personal development, I learned about my spirituality. I remember the first book I ever read was The 7 Spiritual Laws of Success. And it just resonated so good. And I was like, okay, I get this. I believe this. I'm choosing to believe it. And then I went down the route, Joe Dispenza, and so on and so forth. And so, yeah, just through the work of moving out on my own, living by myself, and really reading books, educating myself, that's how I started to learn about spirituality and what spirituality means for me. And even more recent, I have really connected with what God is to me. I believe that there is a God, which is also the universe, higher power, the thing that's up there that is keeping us guided and protected in the right way. I believe God is love and light. And so that is what I mean by God. If you guys ever hear me speak about God, I just really want you to know that I'm not religious. I'm not in a religion. I'm not in a cult. I am just spiritual, and I believe in God and the universe and all of the laws, all the universal laws. If you are someone who is super curious about spirituality or wants to learn more about their own belief system, because you can have different belief systems from your brother, your mom, your dad. I believe we are all entitled to our own belief systems. And so what I would recommend is just get curious. Getting curious with maybe listening to more podcasts about it, maybe going to a church, maybe reading books. That's really what kickstarted my journey in spirituality. Kind of, because that's what really made me go deep. It was all the other signs, like when my aunt passed away, the angel numbers. I have a crazy wicked story about, oh my gosh, did I just say wicked? Who am I? Where did I live that I picked that up from? Wicked. It wasn't a New York thing. I have a crazy cool story about when my grandfather passed away. Oof. That's a whole nother podcast. But long story short, he passed away. I ordered this book like a couple days before he passed away. And then the day after he passed away, I read the book, finished beginning to end. And I've never done that before, like in one sitting. And one of the last chapters of the book, the guy who was the author said, recently I was in Arizona, which is where I was when I was reading the book, visiting my friend whose wife's name was Jessica. That's my name. And I went to visit them the day after her grandfather passed away. And I read that book the day after my grandfather passed away. And the author of the book has the same initials as my grandpa. And so for me in that moment, I really felt that my grandfather and God was just bringing them like the energy through that book. And there's no such thing as a coincidence. This quote is so good. Coincidences are God's way of remaining anonymous. And I'm going to say that again. Coincidences are God's way of remaining anonymous. Haters will say it's a coincidence. Everything's meant to be. Everything's meant to be. Whew. Wow, it feels good to share that with you guys. I love being vulnerable. And like I mentioned earlier, I feel like when I started my podcast, my intention was to be vulnerable, but there's layers to it for sure. And I'm going to have grace with myself and not be so hard on myself, right? This whole journey is super new to me, doing a podcast, like really, really sharing my life. And so we're getting a little deeper, one step at a time. But moving forward, my real intention is to be even more vulnerable. So I have another story that I'm going to share with you guys. I'm going to make this kind of like a series. I don't know what I'm going to call it yet, but it should be in the title by now. Just going to be something about my story because there's a lot. My story is deep. Maybe I won't even make it a series and I'll just continue to share and be vulnerable throughout the podcast. That feels better because before I was trying to think of a series name, like my story part 1, my story part 2, but nothing was coming. And I think that was a sign. So we're just going to get vulnerable here with you. And I hope you guys enjoy this. I hope you were able to take something away from this. That's my intention also behind doing these podcasts, is to support you guys and to be here for you. And it's time for us to just chill and hang out and get real with each other. I totally been in certain places where I didn't have friends that kind of thought like me. And so that's why I turned to podcasts, or I turned to other people online like YouTube. And then I actually started attracting the friends when I really started embodying who I was. But thank you guys so much for watching. If you're watching this on YouTube, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe down below. If you're watching this on my main channel, please go to A Stronger You and subscribe over to that channel, because that's the main podcast channel, as I will only be posting on there soon. I know I've been saying that for a minute, but soon I'm not going to post on my personal channel. And if you are listening to this on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, what's up? If you like it, please review it. It helps me out. It helps the growth of the channel. Please come over and follow me on Instagram at jessica.tellian. I've been sharing a lot more about my coaching, about any offers that I have. I'm getting more vulnerable on Instagram with you. I just started a Instagram, what is it called? It's like a community tab. It's a community section. It's free. You can join the channel. And I post daily motivational things in there for you. But that is all, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next podcast.